Hi, my name is Jeremiah Morrow, and for my research paper, I decided to cover the average experience of somebody living under Japan during World War II, whether that's in an occupied territory such as Manchuria or Japan itself. Um, I decided to cover the whole spectrum. What I found in my research is about what I expected, and that's that anybody living under Japan, whether it's occupied territory or it's Japan itself, lived a life of fear, of intimidation, of just propaganda getting shoved down their throats every day. Um, that about sums it up. But to go deeper into it, on the fear and intimidation aspect of it, both Japanese civilians and civilians within occupied territories of Japan got to enjoy, I'm using that sarcastically, the Kempeitai, which was the Japanese military secret police, frequently doing, various forms of intimidation and straight up stealing from the local populace, stealing supplies for the effort, the war effort, doing reprisal attacks. This was a really big one that I didn't know about before, but the Japanese military, the secret military police, would actively lash out against the civilian populace as a way of revenge whenever there was negative talk about the Japanese, or an active resistance against occupation or the war effort. So that was something that everybody, regardless of whether or not it was occupied territory or Japan itself, got to enjoy. Enjoy, used sarcastically. In addition to that, propaganda. I found that the Japanese, just like Nazi Germany, their allies, both used a lot of propaganda to brainwash the civilian populace of both occupied territories and Japan. And the propaganda took many forms. It was not just, posters or, speeches. It was movies. It was songs. It was all manner of propaganda. And the general messaging that this propaganda had was that all Asian people should come together under Japan as one cohesive unit, with Japan leading. So, it was still a Japan-dominated group, but they wanted to bring Asians forcefully into this group. And this was propaganda that was pushed very hard in occupied territories, obviously, to try and win over the civilians there to accept Japan as their new rulers, their new leaders. So there was that. There was propaganda. There was also propaganda, of course, on the war front side of things, and demonizing the Allied forces. Showing them as demons, showing them as the evil people who want to take away Japan's glory and Japan's honor. So that was the propaganda side of it, and that was something that was baked into every aspect of Japanese life during this time. This was something that you could not escape. Every street you turned onto, there was posters. There's people talking. Regurgitating these propaganda points. It was very heavily pushed into society, which it had to be, because that's how you brainwash people. So there's propaganda. There was the Kempeitai, generally brutalizing people, to be frank, and harassing them, and just not treating the civilian population fairly. So there was that aspect of it. Now, aside from being intimidated and brutalized by the secret police and having propaganda shoved down their throat, you also had food shortages. This was due to mismanagement, the Kempeitai hoarding food, all sorts of things. But generally, just mismanagement, and obviously the war effort's general drain on supplies led to many food shortages. So much so that rice, which prior to World War II was a staple in every household, after World War II it still generally is. It's a staple food in many Asian households. Rice was like equivocated to gold. Like, if you had rice that was a big deal, which just goes to show how horrible the food shortages were during this time for Japan. The civilian population really suffered in this regard. In addition to this, and this is probably the largest thing, this is the largest thing, this is the thing that a lot of people talk about, I would say only rivaled by the Kempeitai, is comfort women. So, Japan, or more specifically, I should say, the military, because this was primarily done in army brothels, army-ran brothels, but Japan would force not just Japanese women, but women, period. Women in occupied territories, women that weren't even Japanese. They would force all manner of women to prostitute themselves at the whim of army men for Japan. So I guess Japanese army men could be, they could stay satisfied at the cost of these poor women. This was a really big thing. It was not a few little fringe cases. This is a well-documented and massive part of Japan's history during this time. Thousands upon thousands of women were done this way by the army, and to this day, generally speaking, if I'm not incorrect, the Japanese government generally doesn't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to come to terms with the fact that this happened. And it relies on activists to say the people's names that were affected by this. Now that I've covered what I set out to cover, which is, that's the main points of my research paper and what I got from it, I'd like to cover why I picked this as my research topic. And essentially, the reason that I picked it was because I feel like, generally speaking, the Pacific Front of World War II is overshadowed quite a lot by Nazi Germany. When we talk about World War II, the first thing that comes to mind is the European front, the Holocaust, Nazi Germany's mistreatment of civilians. Outside of that, such as the Gestapo, their secret police. And it's worth talking about those things, of course. It's very important. But with that being said, I feel like the Pacific Front, due to these things, is generally overshadowed by the European front with Nazi Germany. So I felt like it's important that, out of everything being discussed amongst these presentations, that there be somebody that maybe shed some light on the average experience of the Japanese civilian, because when it comes down to it, we certainly helped in Nazi Germany. We helped a lot. We helped to fight back the Nazis. But when it comes to a war that was more focused on the U.S., the Pacific Front had much more of a focus on us, because it was primarily us versus Japan. So it's worth covering the average life of somebody living in Japan's territory to kind of compare and contrast with the average life of somebody living in our territory during that time, in America. That's why I picked it. I just thought it'd be interesting. In conclusion, the average life of somebody living under Japan during World War II was one that was generally miserable and almost suffocating, with the propaganda being shoved down people's throats, and the Kempeitai intimidating people, and, doing reprisal attacks, killing innocents simply because a minority was fighting out against them, lashing out and, complaining, and going as far as to take women and forcing them into army brothels, turning them into comfort women for the men that were serving just because they could. And of course, also the food shortages, other general supply shortages, and the propaganda. That's the suffocating part. The propaganda that was shoved down their throats constantly. So yeah, food shortages, the military generally bullying the populace, and the government not only turning a blind eye to it all, but practically enabling the behavior and encouraging it on the Kempeitais part, knowing that the Kempeitai could do their dirty work without them directly being able to take ownership, which to this day, generally speaking, they still haven't really done, to be honest. So yeah, that was the major points of my research that I uncovered, is that unfortunately for Japanese people, it wasn't very good during World War II. So thank you for listening.